All right, good evening. I'd like to call to order the Board of Education Finance Committee meeting for Monday, March 23rd, 2026. I'll start off with public comment. I'm not seeing anyone here. We'll move on to item number 3, approval of the minutes from January 26th, 2026. Bonnie, did you receive any corrections? Anyone have any at this time? All right, do I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented in the packet?
So moved.
Second? All in favor say aye.
I have to abstain.
Aye.
You have to abstain?
Yeah,
Okay.
I wasn't here.
All right. 2 ayes and 1 abstain. Motion carries. Moving on to item number 4, discussion and consideration. We have the fiscal year 2025-2026 6-month review. Mr.
Right.
Latham, take it
Good
away.
evening. So, 6-month review is a nice place to look and see how we're doing budget-wise to our actuals. It's as much illumination for me as it is support. Shines about how well we're doing or not doing, but also gives me some level of assurance that we're on track from what we budgeted and we're controlling our revenues and our expenses along the way. So a little bit about our revenues. Sometimes things will change from year to year. So this starts probably right in the middle of COVID, comes into when we came out of it. So you'll see some variances in some of the things that we look at, but we also start looking for some stability. And I look at those in December of 2024. I look at those in December of 2025. So were there adjustments that we had to make? Yes. Were there some changes we didn't anticipate? Yes. But now we're looking for that stability. So I'll start on the right side and look at 3 years ago, December 2022. And we're really talking about our taxation, which is heavily affected upon 2 things, the value of land and the consumer price index that we use for the taxation process. So looking at the first line of taxes and revenues, in December of 2022, we were at about 50%. We move into December of 2023, 48%. December of 2024, 51%, bless you, and 2025, 49%. Now, sometimes those will change for a couple reasons. So we did see some change in which people had made their installment payments, a lot more people in June. And so sometimes that affects the year, and sometimes they'll make them in September, which will affect the year. And sometimes we have some people that don't pay their taxes. So as long as we're kind of in that stability, which looks like we are, I think we're very good with the flow of our taxes and revenue. When we look at our other local, those are all the other things we have, mostly think about fees and participation and registration, parking fees, all those things that come in as other fees to the district. We looked at 2022 in December of about 31%, very low. The reason why is because we didn't have always school then and a lot of participation, and we didn't have all of our events. Think about the time frame that it was. Then we emerged out of that into December 23, and we had 62%, and then December 24, 45%, and this year we're at 62%. So a couple of those things are just some changes over time on when some of these things occur, but also some more reliance on the fact that we're getting, I would say, back somewhat to normal, because we should get most of our fees in a given point in the year because that's when most of our students register. Looking at our state revenue, that's an area that we've seen a lot of change from the 48% in December of 2022 to 51% in 23 to 40% in 24, and a decrease again to 30% in December of 2025. And this is more indicative of that conversation that we've had where some of our revenue is lower, some of our reimbursements are lower, and some of our allocations in state areas are lower. Not so much in evidence-based funding, that's been very stable for us. A lot of areas of grants that we've seen some of that decline. So that's just a trend that we're seeing now in the business office with that state revenue. Not as reliable as it used to be, and you can see how it's declined in the last couple of years. Same thing with federal. Federal had a couple jumps in it. In year 2022, we had a large ESSER's CARES Act grant, right, that we received from federal government. They had to do when we spent those dollars when we claimed them. And then we've seen another jump a little bit more in December 2024. Almost 75% of our funds came in that December time frame. So the federal's a little more unpredictable, and this year we're at about 45%. I do know that in January we had a large IDEA sped claim, And so some of that's just timing, and some of that's how we spent our money. So I feel confident when we look at the bottom line, 48%, 48%, 50%, 49%, very stable in our revenue. Even though we see these changes in different areas of our revenue, we've been very stable with the overall revenue for the district. So I think those are in line with what we're expecting. We did respond to certain things. Some of these areas too, it might be lower due to some either placement of students, or they might be in some of our reimbursement timing. But overall, I believe that what we're looking at is some very stable revenue for the district, which I think is reassuring. Questions on this page? Okay, so a little bit about our ad valorem taxes. As we know, those are affected by the two areas that I mentioned, the value of land and property and the consumer price index, which we apply when we do our taxation calculation. So we have seen some large jumps in our taxes at this point in the year. So in December of 22, we had about 44 million. December of 23, we had 47 million. December of 24, 50 million. December of 2025, 51 million. So I think that's where you kind of see that consumer price index with some large jumps that we see take place and some more stabilization of the taxation process. It's just something we have to keep in mind. A little bit about our local revenue. We discussed that it had gradually increased, and the graph is a filled-in graph instead of a bar graph. And I think it just kind of shows that we had some increases as students returned, activity returned, participation returned, and those are kind of stable in many of the things that we're looking at. Another factor in local revenue I point out in the bottom is we are seeing that decrease in interest income. So we've seen some large jumps as well, and we're seeing those start to come down. I think when you look this point in 2026, we'll see the same thing. We'll see, our local revenue start to trend downward as well, just because our investments.
Hey Todd, what's besides just student fees and things like that, what are included in the local revenue?
Yeah, so it's food service.
Okay.
That's an example. A lot of that's a lot of in and outs. It almost equals out. So when I look at that, I look at like participation fees, athletic fees, gate fees, parking fees. All those other fees that we charge, our costs, all come out of our local revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And this is a little bit our state revenues. This is where I show you where we're seeing reimbursements to decrease. And when we look at the four mandated categoricals, we see those reimbursement rates decline as well. So this is just a showing of our state revenue is not as reliable it used to be. We're not seeing the same level of support in the areas that we participated in state programs. And same thing with the federal. This really emphasizes those payments that we see. Got a payment, and we spent money and didn't get anything. Then we made another. We had another big claim that we had come in, and then kind of back down to where we're really at with our federal. And mostly our federal, we get over $1 million in our IDA, so we use that for special education purposes, and that's probably the largest federal grant that we have when we look at those funds. So, we do see that decline as well. So, expenditures, the next area that I want to take a look at. Same thing, when we look at the 6-month snapshot looking back at our salaries, at this point in time in December of 2022 in the far top right, 37%, December of 23, 38%, December of 24, 38%, December of 25, 38%. Very stable because we have the ability to project out those salaries that we have. So that's probably one of the areas that we do very well in. We use our working agreements. Those also help us estimate what those costs are. And so this time of year, we kind of know how we're trending, very accurate for us. Very similar to that is the benefits, 40%, 40%, 39%, 40%. So those almost always go hand in hand. So same amount of employees that we estimate paying and the same amount of employees that we have for the benefits. Where we start to see some differences is in our purchase services. So in December of 2022, we had 53%. In December of 23, 51%. In December of 24, 59%. And in December of 2025, we had 53%. So those change a little bit. Some of those are costs that we see increase for architectural fees, engineering fees, legal fees, just typical things that we would outsource or we would need support for. And some of those are also in the learning environment. So we have kind of seen some stability, an increase, and back to some stability in our purchase services. When we look at our supplies and materials, that's the area that's kind of area that we've seen quite a bit of change. That's really affected by CPI, and we've seen inflationary costs in our supplies and materials. We've also have seen some times where we couldn't get those, and so maybe we weren't able to spend as fast as we wanted to. So back in December of 2022, with our supplies and materials, we had 38%. In December 23, we had 43%, and we had 49%, and then most recently in December 2025, we had 39% of our supplies and materials. So an area of our budget for the expenditure side, we see a lot of volatility or changes throughout time. When it comes to our capital outlay, keep in mind that those were some of our project years, and those will change. So in December 2022, we had 33% of our expenditures after 6 months into the budget, and we had 54% in 23. 6 months into 2024, we had 60%, and then this year, we've had a lot of our projects that have they have been completed on time. We've been able to get those projects done. Everything's been here for the materials to complete those and the labor, and so we're at 78%, much farther ahead than we have been in past years. So I think that's just good for us that we're showing those projects trending the way that we want them to, being able to get what we need, being able to get this labor to put those in, and keeping our projects in time, and our construction management. And that just goes back to a lot of that to our O&M department. Our other objects, those are the things that you look at that are such as our bond and interest payments. Those are our tuition payments. Those are other payments that we have. And so 46% in 2022, 88% in 2023, 85% in 2024, and 82%. So a lot of that has to do with some just the timing of our payments and when we make those. Other objects was a little off in 2023. Think about the time frame that it was. We wouldn't have a lot of private tuition at that point if we didn't have any students for some of that, and that might have changed some of our costs at that time too. Maybe who was in the school, maybe who was homeschooled or was placed somewhere in a private facility. So some of those have changed for us. But when you look at the other objects, we're getting back to that normalcy where we see most of it is due to our debt service. And then lastly, our non-capital, those are mostly equipment areas. 23% in December 22, 40% in 2023, 67% in December 2024. Again, it came through a large period where we realized, like, our capital, we also had some non-capital costs and replacing a lot of our equipment that began to fail, and we needed to replace. And then lastly, 33% here in December 2025. Big picture again is the bottom line, and that's all the summative costs of our expenditures. And so 40% in December of 2022, 53% December of 2023, 53% in December 2024, and 50% December of 2025. So again, kind of very stable on our expenditures. Yes?
Yeah, Todd, the salaries and benefits, they're your largest overall expenditures. I would have expected that if this is 6 months to have been much closer to 50%. Is there delays in things, or is it because this includes July and half of August because they're not being paid at that point where they have more paydays in the second half of the year?
Yeah, it really has to do with our accrual system of accounting. So when we have those teacher contracts, which account for most of our salaries, we do pay them in July and August, and we accrue those back to the current fiscal year. So you'll see the month of June, we'll true that up and make that look very different, closer to where it should be at the end of the year, in that 98, 100% range. It's just basically how our contracts work, how we pay our teachers, and how we do our accounting and our accrual process. Yep, and you'll see that's the same thing with benefits, right? Those go hand in hand, so, okay. So a little bit about the salaries that, we talked about those, but just to show you, that they are increasing, they are following our agreements, market responses, our competitive spirit of our payments to our employees. And then, so this area of expense is one that's grown probably the most over time, and it's indicative of the display where you can kind of see it grow. We went from a low of December 2022 of 22 million to December 2025 of 25 million. Same thing with the benefits, they trend the same typically. Same amount of employees, same pay, same benefits. We've seen those increase too. A lot of those have just been the cost to our insurance cooperative, and just the overall cost for healthcare. Purchase services look a little more stable. Again, we did have some increases in those, but those are kind of leveled out. A lot of the costs we had over the years in purchase services were costs that were passed on to us by people with whom we do business. Our materials, we kind of had a big spike, as you can see, in 2023 from this point of time in other years. I mentioned here that a lot of those had to do with our response to cleaning structures requirements that we had. Also was affected by the highest point we had in CPI. Our inflation was the highest that was ever, and that chart just kind of reinforces that. Our capital, same thing. We had a high point in 2024 with our capital plans that we had and our capital costs. So that just shows that we kind of reached the pinnacle in 2024, and we kind of pulled those costs back down to more manageable areas. So we had a lot of boilers, heaters, roast replacements. It was just a very difficult year for us in December 2024 with the biggest capital plan we've had as long as I've worked here. Then our other objects is the same thing. We had a spike. Usually these are the tuition dues and fees that I mentioned that we pay other agencies. So we did see a large increase that in December 2024. That was our high point. Also, some of our larger capital needs, our funds started getting transferred around at that point. You can see a high point in that as well, as we had just a lot of needs in that particular year. And then lastly is our non-capital. I mentioned that, we had a point in time where we had to buy a lot more equipment. We had to replace that, and that was in December of 2024. 2024 was just kind of like that rough year. You can see a lot of things just hit the district at the same time, and we look for that stability. One slide that I put together here is just our funds. We can go through all of those, but I think I like to see the big picture of everything from our education fund all the way through Fund 90, which is our life, health, safety. Same thing. I kind of look at what that bottom line looks like, and I look at December 2022, we were at about 43% of our expenses. December 2023, we were at this point, the same point in time, 53%. 1 year ago in December 2024, we're at 50%, and then we're very much trending on the same path of this year in December 2025 at that 49%. So you do see some different fluctuations, and the education fund is very stable. We do see some changes in the operations and maintenance fund. A lot of those have to do with timing and projects and when things were able to get done. But overall, I just look at all those funds, and overall, how are we trending from year to year? And again, you can see the last 2 years is more stable, and where we kind of bring things back into what I would call normalcy on the revenue side. Look at the expense side. Again, funds 10 through 90. We were 40% in December 2022, 53% in December 2023, 50% in December of 2024, and 50% in December of 2025. So overall, that's what I want to see as we kind of move in the most recent years, that we're very consistent what we do, very stable, very good idea of our budget and how we control those things. And a lot of that too is working with our departments too. When we look at schools, for example, when we look at a building level budget, we look at them and have them think about what the first 6 months look like, right? We want a lot of the purchase to happen then because we're providing those resources to the students in the classroom at that point in time. And so we want to make sure that those are spent as well. And then our goal then is to spend the rest of those budgets throughout the rest of the year. So when I look at this, very comfortable, 43% revenue to 40% expenses, 53% revenue to 53% expenses, 50% revenue to 50% expenses, 49% revenue to 50% expenses. So when I look at those, we get to December, that's a good point. Now, why did they change in January? They changed because we're starting to spend down those fund balances, and we're at a different point in the year. Our revenues start to decline. There's no more taxes. There's nothing else. So we really have come in except some interest income. When you look at like the treasurer's report in January, you'll start to see that trend differently. Start in January, February, March, starts to go back up in those May and June. So it's a typical cycle that we have, and we just come back to that. So overall, I think everything's good at this point in time. I feel very comfortable in our budget and our transactions to date. Any questions on this slide?
I just have one.
Yes.
What is Fund 70 and 80? That
Yeah.
looks like it's a big revenue bucket, but then no expenditures come out of there, so.
Yeah, so Fund 70 is our working cash fund, so really that's the largest fund that I do all the investments out of. And it's very reliant on the market and our return on investments that we've had. So, good example for that is that Fund 70, we underestimated the revenue for 2022. We just didn't know what the market would look like. That's just an honest statement. And then we got a little bit back to where we kind of seen where the economy was going, and we could get back to 122%. Make sure I got the right 100, and then 40% and 41%. So it's really just us responding to that tough time where the market was just volatile. We didn't know where it was going, and just kind of trying to figure out then where we got to some more stable investments. One of the reasons that we were able to get to that point is because we laddered out some of our investments, so we had an idea over time what we were going to get. Went away from more short-term to some longer-term investing, which then we could lock in some rates that helped us calculate that. Fund 80 is our tort fund, so really that's just a fund that we haven't had any need for the expenditures. We just have the revenue come in, and it kind of models what you see on that interest income line above it.
Do we always under budget for that, or over budget for that?
No, in 2022 we were just,
Yeah, obviously, yeah, right.
we say
But
we,
typically,
I really mean me. I was really off that year. I just had no idea what the economy was doing.
sure.
It was a tough time. Change was there, and we just had to make a prediction, and I was wrong. Wrong in a positive way.
Right.
So I just I didn't want to be too optimistic. I wasn't sure where it was going, and yet we still had a pretty good return. You'll see that decline now. Like I mentioned, what I used to get, maybe a CD of 5-something% is more like 3.8 or 3.9, and that's if we take that investment out, 3 or 5 years, and we can lock it in also. Okay, other questions? Good question though.
Thanks.
Okay, so our auditor came in December, and I had a slide prepared at that point that had the fund balance, and then he gave his presentation. I figured I needed to come back and update it. So at the end of June, we had about $75,121,948 in fund balance, and that's the high point of the year, right? So we've done most of our expenses for the year. This is the high point of any fund balance that carries into the next year, and then we keep that revenue going with our taxation, and then of course is the time we see now, right? We don't get any taxes mostly for November, December, January, February, March, or April. And so this is always the high point. I wanted to come back and report that to you. It's a public act that I have to follow. It just lets you know basically what the funds were at the end of that year, and that was verified when the auditor came and gave the audit. So I thought I'd come back and update you. And then the other area that I have to follow, another public act, is called the Miller ratio. The Miller ratio takes 3 years of 3 specific funds. It takes the Ed Fund, the Transportation Fund, and the Operations Fund. It lets me take those 3 years and average out what average of 3 years of expenses are, and then I calculate out what 2 or 2.5% will look like. Then I have to do the same thing for our cash reserves. And so our cash reserves at the end of 24-25 were $42,980,762, and that amount should never exceed what our expenses are. So it really is just a report to tell you that we're not accumulating cash, we're not holding cash. We don't have to have what the bottom says, which is basically written operational fund reserve, because we have too much cash we're holding on to. In this case, this proves that we're not, and that we're in compliance with the act. And then lastly, questions.
Any other questions?
So we look good? Everybody feels comfortable? Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that review.
Thanks, Todd.
Okay, so moving on, we do, under item number 4, have a second item, the 2026-2027 finance meeting calendar. Does anyone have any comments or questions about the calendar?
Yeah, I assume that it's the second meeting of the month unless we have only one meeting that month.
Correct.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay, great. Item number 5, future agenda items. We have nothing. Item number 6, items for recommendation to the full board. So we do have this finance meeting calendar for year 26-27. Do I have a motion to move that onto the full board for consideration?
I think before, maybe because there's some certain finance meetings that are, a little more I don't know, important, they're all important, but you know what I mean, that have a little more, you know,
Significant.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can notate that somehow in this kind of calendar thing, just so the public, if they're looking at, okay, what.
Yeah, so like on this document, Todd could help us note,
like,
this meeting's gonna be the levy, or
The
this
levy,
meeting's
right,
gonna
yeah.
be the budget, or.
Right.
Yeah,
First,
yeah. Todd, you can help us with that, I bet. Thank you.
good idea. Okay, we'll make that adjustment. Do I have a second to move this on to the full board?
So moved.
I'll second that. All in favor say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay. Motion carries. We'll move that on to the full board for consideration. Item number 7, information, legislative update. I don't have anything. Dr. Barrett, anything?
Not really. I mean, the governor did give his budget address last week. Looks largely kind of status quo, flat in terms of anything that would impact the district. And obviously, his address isn't legislation, but it impacts what the legislators are then going to start working on and working through. So it's just good to be aware of that, and we'll see how that all goes. I mean, it's not, my general sense would be to say it's not as bad as it maybe could have been. It's not, in terms of impact to the district, there's certainly not growth or, you know, adjustment, especially in the mandated categoricals that have been prorated and that we've been hoping to see come back up. But, you know, it's not